Welcome back to the show. I'm so honored to host my next guest. I've been wanting to talk to her for a very long time. You may know her as the wife of Hal Finney, who was the first person to receive a Bitcoin transaction from Satoshi Nakamoto. He's one of the original cypherpunks. But I'm excited to talk to his wife, Fran Finney, who is passionately fighting for a very special cause that we're going to talk about. So, Fran, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, you're welcome, Natalie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we got to be on a Spaces several months back. So I want to hear a little bit more about your story because, as I mentioned off the top, a lot of people know you as the wife of Hal Finney, but who is Fran Finney?
Thank you for asking that. I know it seems like I run into people with one of two different ideas of who I might be. And one is either that since I was married to Hal, and Hal was such a coder and so brilliant with coding, that I must also have a lot of understanding, comprehension, interest, etc. in coding. And the second is that the kind of the opposite, that I'm the wife of Hal and I'm just a domestic person and I don't know anything. And I would say that I am a scientific person. I met Hal when we were both students at Caltech. I was a really good student, but I'm not a coder and I'm not technical. My field is in medicine. I entered Caltech pre-med. I ended up going into physical therapy. There's a long story behind that, but primarily because I wanted to finish the whole schooling thing and get going with getting married and all that. So I didn't finish the medical degree, but I am, I would say, more mathematically inclined than most people in the medical field. I'm just not a coder and I've never learned how to program. I grew up back in the 50s, 60s, and it was brand new back then. Everyone knows it now. Back when I was in school, it didn't even exist.
Yeah, I mean, I relate to you because I am not a coder. I entered this space not being technical, which probably is why I sort of resisted Bitcoin for a long time. And I regret that because it was not as overwhelming and intimidating as I once thought. But, just getting to know you a little bit more, how did you end up at the school that you did? And how did you meet Hal? You gave us a little bit of your love story the last time I talked. So, and I know people
Okay.
loved it. So let's reshare that story.
Sure, and please feel free to ask me because I don't remember what I shared last time. But I didn't. Entering Caltech was sort of lucky. I lived in San Diego, and my mother was a very protective Holocaust survivor mother, and she gave me what she called a 100-mile radius for where I could go to school.
Oh, wow.
And living in San Diego, there's not a lot of options. You can't go west, that's the ocean. You can't go south unless you're really good at Spanish and want to go to Mexico. So it was either east or north or both. So I looked at all the schools, pretty much Los Angeles or San Diego. And I thought, oh, okay, I don't know where I want to go. My physics teacher, I was taking physics that year, said, oh, you should apply to Caltech. And I'd never even heard of Caltech. I thought, okay, why not? And then my parents didn't have much money, so they limited me, and they said I could apply to 3 schools, 100-mile radius, 3 schools. So I applied to UC San Diego, I applied to Caltech, and I applied to Pomona Pitzer, which was a school up in that area. Got accepted to all 3, and my mother wanted me to major in fine arts. I was very much into math. I didn't like that. I was very much into science, and I didn't like that. So just to be an annoying kid, I picked Caltech, which wouldn't give me the options back then to major in fine arts or any of that. So that's how I ended up at Caltech. It's random.
And so did you meet Hal in your classes or how did that happen?
That's also kind of weird because he was 2 years behind me. I was a year ahead, so I'm only a year older than him. But he was 2 years behind me. So my junior year is when Hal entered as a freshman. And I was just intrigued by him. He was very athletic. He was brilliant, and I was just intrigued by him. That those 2 years that we were at Caltech together, we were friends. I was 2 years ahead of him, and it just didn't seem. I mean, we were friends. We were good friends, but we weren't going together. we were living in the same dorm. They called them student houses. And I just was very intrigued by him. I graduated. I moved on to back to San Diego to go to grad school. And we kept up our friendship. And about a year later, we started going together.
What do you most fondly recall from those days of, dating and then ending up married? You started a family together, and I'm assuming he was always kind of coding, programming, maybe working on what would, eventually become something that laid the foundation for what a lot of the cypherpunks worked on.
Well, he challenged me. I'm a pretty normal person. I'm not that creative, really. Hal was into everything. He was into hiking, he was into running, he was into astronomy, he would like to take pictures, he was into camping, he was into coding. He just was into so many things. He was always busy, he was always doing things. And so I just remember that because he was into traveling. He was into living. He was into the future. So I remember all those things because at the very beginning it was brand new to me. That's part of what intrigued me about him, because I wasn't that way. I came from a very protective Holocaust survivor Jewish family. And Hal was himself. He was a thinker. He was into, he's just going to name it. He was into it. He was into philosophy. He read all the time. He was into politics in a kind of a different way. And so I just remember it was like a flurry of almost fantasy when he was into skiing. He taught me how to ski. One of my fondest memories probably is before we were married, and he took me on my first ski trip. It was very exciting. We went to Utah, went to Salt Lake City. He taught me how to ski. He was a super good skier. He would do jumps and fancy stuff. And he taught me, though, enough that I could do the advanced slopes really slowly and carefully. But he was just like a stunt skier. He wanted to go skydiving. He wanted to do everything.
Yeah, he seemed very athletic. Obviously, a lot of people know that iconic photo of him running, and we'll talk about the challenge in a little bit. What do you remember from the early days of Bitcoin? It's time for a quick break to hear these messages from my partners who make this podcast possible. Coin Stories is brought to you by Bitdeer, where the power of Bitcoin mining is at your fingertips. As a publicly traded leader, Bitdeer's global reach and scale means they're everywhere you need them to be, ensuring you're part of the thriving Bitcoin economy. Bitdeer's not just mining, they are industry pioneers, and Bitdeer stands alone as the only vertically integrated, technology-focused Bitcoin mining company. What does that mean? Well, they're not just deploying, but developing the latest tech to make Bitcoin mining more efficient and effective. With the industry's most experienced leadership team, innovation is in their DNA, and it shows. With a quarter of their workforce dedicated to research and development, pushing the boundaries of what's possible in Bitcoin mining. And now they're leveraging years of expertise in data center and cloud management into high-performance computing through a recently announced partnership with NVIDIA. Join Bitdeer in reshaping the world of Bitcoin mining. Learn more at bitdeer.com and explore how they are pioneering the future today.
It came at such a bad time in Hal's life, so that he had not the very beginnings, pre-early days when he was first working on it, that I remember. So I remember back in maybe very early 2009, I remember hearing dings in the background in our room. We have a big room. This is the room I'm in right now, and it's filled with computers and a lot of clutter. But anyway, I remember hearing dings and asking Hal, what are those dings? What is that? Because it was different. And he said, oh, it's just a project that I'm working on with some friends. And I didn't really ask him too much about it. He did tell me at some point early that it was a project that was going to allow people to do like financial transactions with using code, and the code would be unique codes, and so that way people wouldn't have to rely on financial institutions. But I'm not a finance person. I'm not a coder, so I didn't really know what he was talking about. It didn't really make sense to me. I mean, okay, how can unique codes be used to transfer funds? Like, what is this? But and he didn't really tell me more about that, Natalie, except the fact that it was a project. And at that time, it really was a project. We're talking maybe late, and that must have been early 2009. I'm not sure. I don't know if it was before or after he did his running Bitcoin tweet, but sometime around there, late 2008, early 2009. And then he started getting sick. And then he started getting, then all of my focus being a medical person is, what is wrong with you? Why are you slurring your words? Why are you having trouble talking while we run? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And I kept driving him to go to doctors because I thought it was something that we needed to figure out and fix. So that was where all of my mind was for the rest of that year, and from there on out, actually.
It was around 2009 that he was diagnosed?
He was diagnosed in the end of July 2009. He was diagnosed.
So that's only several months after Bitcoin kind of came about. So what can you describe, what was your relationship like before all of that? I mean, obviously even Twitter didn't come around. It wasn't what it is today where you sign on and everyone's just talking about this whole space. Before that, I mean, social media wasn't even obviously a big thing.
Correct.
So what was your life like with Hal before all of that?
Hal was always very much into new stuff. So we were always ahead of the he got into social media in a way before everyone else was into it. He was doing Reddit. He got me to sign up for Facebook, which back then was like cool. And the tweeting and the Twitters and all of that. He was early with that. We had some of the first computers. He taught my son learned how to read on a computer back in 1980. I don't remember. I think would have been 1988. He was 3 years old, and Hal wrote a program for him because this was pre any of the little good home computers or anything like that. So yeah, life was always ahead of the game. We were into music, and Hal never wanted to stay with music from our youth. We were always listening to new stuff. When it came to his coding, I never understood it, but I helped him. Like, he did a conference where he was talking about RPAL, and I didn't know what it was, but he practiced it on me. So, we shared that stuff. It was just that I feel responsible now. If I could go back, I would learn coding. But this was a long time ago. And when I went through school, I didn't even know how to type. Everyone did everything by hand. We were still learning cursive. And I was lazy. And I wasn't like my husband. I didn't try to stay on top of things. I didn't learn coding. I'm still a terrible typist. I still have to look at the keyboard. Hal bought me these different things for me to teach myself how to touch type, and I never bothered. So I still have to look at the keyboard and then look at the screen and see all the mistakes that I made and correct them. And he was he was ahead of it. So yeah, it was the old-fashioned and the modern, but we complemented each other.
Before Bitcoin, I didn't know what a cypherpunk was. I was like, is that a job? Is that a job? I mean, was this his full-time job? Was he a coder? Did he work for a company?
He worked for several different companies, but when he helped develop PGP with Phil Zimmerman, but when he did that, he wasn't working for them. That was just a hobby. He did a lot of things on the side. At that time, he was working, I believe, for Green Hill Software, doing interface between hardware and software. And he did that because he wanted to learn more about how compilers worked, because prior to that he'd been writing computer games for another company, and he was always wanting to challenge himself. So he did computer games, something called Intellivision. Very rudimentary kind of interesting. I helped him with that. I did the art because, like, my mother said I was an artist, but the art was I did the art. And
That's fascinating.
back in
I'm
those
sure a lot
days,
of
people did like everyone did the whole game. So he it wasn't like a big team like it is now. Games were simple, and one person did the whole game. So Hal was responsible for some games on his own, and then he had me help him with the art. He did the sound effects, he did the coding, he did everything. It
wow.
was, yeah.
I don't think most people know about that. And I'm sure he shared with you about like his childhood. Was he just always into technology and computers and programming?
Well, there wasn't computers or technology or programming when he was a child. He was born in 1956. So, but he was into secret codes, and he has these little notebooks that his mother gave me with little codes that he wrote. And then when he was in junior high school, they were doing programming, I believe, on with Fortran on little cards, and
Wow.
he was really fascinated by it. He had an older sister who was 10 years older than him, who was in junior college and was taking a programming class. So he taught himself how to do that. He was in junior high, and then the junior high people were so fascinated by that they had him doing programming for them because he knew how to program better than the staff there. So I don't know exactly what he was doing, but he was doing some programming for them while he was in junior high.
Wow. And do you remember when he first said, like, I'm communicating with this Satoshi Nakamoto person and
He
they're
never did
launching
tell
this
me that.
Bitcoin thing?
He never did
No.
tell me that. He said until someone thought he was Satoshi. He said he was working with some friends on a
Wow.
project back then. And then I think at some point when the name Satoshi Nakamoto came up, I might have asked him, who's Satoshi Nakamoto? And he said, oh, that's a guy that I've been working with. And I don't know who he is. I think he must be in Japan based on his name, but his English is really good. I remember that. And so,
Wow. That's fascinating. I mean, just to be on the front lines of what is now what it's turned into. I mean, it must be crazy to just even think about from those early days to what Bitcoin is and represents today.
yeah, this was very different. It was a project. And Hal did a lot of projects. I mean, he wrote PGP, he started that as a project, and it turned into a very good, very widely used program. And he did a lot. I mean, he worked on RPAL. Those were projects. Those were interesting things to him, along with learning how to run in a marathon, learning how to be a pilot. He was a pilot. He had a private pilot's license. He was going to get his instrument license, but then we didn't have the funds to. He was pretty much done with it, but it was expensive, so he stopped. So he never did get his. He never was instrument certified, just
Mm.
private pilot certified, and he never had a plane because we never had enough funds to do that. So we would just rent planes. Did not have money, and like you said, we did end up being very grateful for the fact that I was able to get him equipment that wasn't covered by Medicare and
Mhm.
costs for other things that weren't covered by Medicare when he had ALS because of the Bitcoin. So that was good.
Mhm. So it just came on kind of out of nowhere. You had always seen him, work really hard, always tinkering with
Yeah.
computers, and then suddenly his health was impacted.
The first thing I noticed was maybe in the late winter, early spring, we would go running together and talk. And that was one of my favorite times to talk because he was more of a runner than me. So he would run long distances, but we would always meet for part of his run. So he might do on the order of like 15 miles, 20 miles, and I would do maybe 4 of them with him, something like that. But we would talk, and it was one of my favorite times to talk to him. So at one point, he stopped talking. And I asked him, why aren't you talking? And he said, why aren't you talking while you run? And he said, he was very impatient with me. I remember he said something like, well, you can't expect me to talk while I'm running. And I didn't really understand what he was talking about, so I tried to argue with him.
Mm.
But then, and that might have been maybe March of 2009. But moving forward, after that, he started slurring his words.
Wow.
And I think maybe March, April of 2009, his words were slurring and it sounded like he'd had something to drink, and he didn't drink. So that wasn't it. But I was concerned about that, so I set up an appointment with a neurologist. And at the same time, he was noticing that his right hand felt funny, and he was having trouble coordinating it. And at the same time, he was also running and developing more and more like aches and pains. We didn't think those things were related. We didn't. We thought, okay, he's having trouble with speech. He's developing some sort of overuse injuries from running. Something's wrong with his hand. It just doesn't feel right. So we were taking him to different doctors. Took him to a neurologist, took him to a rheumatologist, took him to orthopedist, took him to a general doctor. And I think it was by summer, early summer, that his neurologist said, I think you have some sort of a neurological problem. We need to send you down to UCLA. It might be ALS. And so,
Wow. That
and
must have hit.
it was still early then. I mean, they diagnosed him really early on. So at that point, he was still running, but his
Wow.
running was labored and slow. His speech was sounding funny. His right hand wasn't working right, but he could still type. But they did a bunch of tests, and that's when and I think it was our 35th wedding anniversary. We went for a bike ride, which we did every year to commemorate, and each year we would ride the number of miles we'd been married. So we did that, and he had, like 2 days later, his appointment at UCLA, something like that, and that's when he got the diagnosis. But he wasn't able to finish the bike ride.
Wow.
I'm just thinking it was our 30th anniversary. I'm misremembering. He lived long enough for us to have a 35th anniversary.
Wow.
But it was we were married in 1979, and it was in 2009 in July, like a week after our anniversary, that he was diagnosed. But I do remember he couldn't finish that ride, and I was shocked because he'd always finished the rides. I mean, it wasn't hard to finish a ride like that for him.
I can't imagine how hard it is to watch the person that you love, their condition just start to deteriorate, and there's nothing that you can do except, try to help. But also, I mean, this is one of the reasons why it's so important to, support research in this space, because there is no cure, right? I mean, someone can
Absolutely,
get treatment,
absolutely.
but it's really, I mean, it's a sentence for the whole family. That means that eventually they really are incapable of doing everything that they once loved.
Yeah, I didn't accept it at first, and I kept fighting. I kept looking for alternative cures. We tried all kinds of things, Natalie. I learned how to do IVs so I could give Hal different nutritional things. We signed up for some studies. We kept trying. I learned how to do acupuncture.
Wow.
I learned how to, with the studies, I learned how to do sterile dressings. I learned a lot of things, and I kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And Hal went along with me for many years of that. He also opted for a tracheostomy, which is to allow him to continue to live after he couldn't breathe on his own anymore. So he did a lot of things. I did a lot of things. But then at some point, things changed, and I didn't even notice at first. But after he'd had the tracheostomy, after things kept deteriorating, and after it got to the point where he had pretty much no movement and was losing the ability to communicate with the computer, and I kept pushing, and I had trying all these different odd, weird things to him. At some point, he told me no more,
Mm.
because he knew it wasn't going to work. I think that's when I didn't give up until then. I kept trying to. And you are correct. There is no cure. We need a cure. There isn't even a way to stop the disease from progressing right now. But what we have found is that there have been some there's improvement now. Things are there have been some things that are better understood about ALS, and I could go into that ad nauseum. I don't think this is the correct platform for that. And we are seeing that people are surviving longer now. Still not a long survival, but people are surviving longer now without the tracheostomy. When Hal had it, the only way to survive if you had a fast progression and you were losing your ability to breathe was to have a tracheostomy. And now there's more time between diagnosis and needing a tracheostomy, because some of the treatments that they are now using that weren't available do slow progression a little bit. Not much, but a little bit, and not for everyone, but for lots of people.
Were you surprised by how much he did keep working? Because from what I've read, Hal continued to be very active in the Bitcoin community up until he really just physically couldn't anymore.
Yeah, he was fascinated by it. He was excited by it. And even after he was no longer working at PGP, he was still trying to contribute to the development of Bitcoin. It was a big thing to him. I think he would be thrilled to see where it is right now. He was so excited when the first time people could actually use it as currency. He never looked at it as a way to make money. He looked at it as a fantastic way to have currency, transfer of currency without involving banks and other institutions.
Well, let me ask you a little bit more about that. I have the white paper above me by Satoshi talking about this idea of this peer-to-peer network. And so many people in the space are really passionate about separating money from third-party sources of power. Did you guys talk about these types of themes and topics, politics, and just the idea of powerful institutions and the need for us to be able to send value to one another across the internet, which really wasn't possible before Bitcoin?
I wish I could say yes. Hal had a lot of friends, a lot of online and in-person friends that he did more involved discussions about that topic. I knew we didn't talk about it much. We had two different areas that we were expertise on. I was his trainer. I was his physical person, and he was my keep Fran from being too centric, because Hal pretty much had everything. So I knew about it, but we didn't have long discussions about it.
It's time for another quick break to hear these messages from my partners. Next up, Bitcoin 2024, the world's largest Bitcoin conference, is coming to Nashville this year. Come join us for 3 amazing days of keynotes, panels, networking events, and my Women of Bitcoin brunch. The Bitcoin conference is where I launched my podcast almost 3 years ago. You never know what can happen or who you can meet here. Head to b.tc/conference and use the code HODL, HODL, for 10% off. Next up, CrowdHealth. Health insurance costs are sky high, and it's money that feels wasted if you don't need a doctor. By crowdfunding healthcare with other Bitcoiners, I get to avoid traditional insurance fees and support real people instead of mega corporations. CrowdHealth also works to reduce your medical bills, so the community's contributions cover more. Imagine spending just $100 a month on healthcare and investing the rest in Bitcoin. If you're interested, visit joincrowdhealth.com/Natalie. All right, back to the show. When people ask you about Bitcoin, what do you say? What is your take on this whole space and what has become, a movement?
No one asks me about Bitcoin, Natalie, because I don't know anything. I mean, anyone who would know enough to be interested in asking me what I thought about Bitcoin or to explain Bitcoin even more wouldn't, because they would think, oh, that's Fran, and she's not going to be able to give me any information. So honestly, I don't think anyone has asked me about Bitcoin. They ask me about how, but they don't ask me about my thoughts or to explain Bitcoin.
Well, what are your thoughts about Bitcoin and what it's turned into?
I see it's amazing, and I mostly see it from my wishing that Hal was around to experience this, because for him it would be rapture. He would be so happy. And so I'm happy because he would be happy, but it's also bittersweet because he's not here.
Well, a lot of people know that Hal was the first person to receive Bitcoin. He was obviously mining it. And there are a lot of assumptions made in this space. And people want to dig into people's lives, obviously. And I know that's impacted your family. There are people out there who believe that Hal Finney is Satoshi Nakamoto. People have written that there was a neighbor, I think, or something that was named Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto who lived near you guys. People are trying to connect the dots, put pieces together. What do you have to say to those out there who read and maybe believe some of those narratives?
Okay, first thing is I would refer them to look at an article by Jameson Lopp. I think it was called "Hal Finney is Not Satoshi Nakamoto," because I think it conclusively establishes that Hal wasn't Satoshi. The first time that someone suggested that Hal was Satoshi, I remember Hal was amused by it. He thought, probably flattered and amused, and he thought it was funny. But as time went on, it wasn't funny anymore. He said, "I'm not Satoshi," and people didn't believe him. And then he couldn't really do anything to establish that, because at that point his ALS was progressed enough that he was having trouble with communication in any form. I think for myself personally, I first of all, people are so, it doesn't even make sense that the only people go into Hal must have gone through all of these elaborate schemes in order to hide the fact that he was Satoshi. There would have been no reason for him to do that, because when he was working on Bitcoin with Satoshi, Bitcoin was an idea. Bitcoin was a puzzle. Bitcoin was a cool concept. It wasn't, there was no value to it. So there was no motivation for him to go through these elaborate things to pretend that he wasn't involved, that he was not Satoshi if he wasn't Satoshi. And then the second thing is knowing Hal and loving Hal and knowing what kind of a person he was. He was a very honest person. He did not lie. He did not hide things. And it's insulting for people have said, "Oh, well, you don't know. Maybe he was hiding it from you. Maybe he was lying to you." Hal did not hide things from me. We had a very open relationship. I don't even want to go into some of the things we were open with each other about, because they're very personal, but we had a very open relationship. He did not lie to me, and I find it irritating and insulting that people would laugh at me and say, "Oh, he was just hiding it from you." In terms of the other things, I think I don't even need to go there, but it's preposterous for people to try to invade our lives, and whether they think Hal was Satoshi or not, this is not acceptable for people to be invading anyone's lives, anyone involved with Bitcoin, anyone not involved with Bitcoin.
Well, that was really one of my concerns for your family, because being now in the public scene of Bitcoin, there are a lot of assumptions made by people who have podcasts or who have businesses that we somehow have this bounty of Bitcoin,
Yeah.
and people do crazy things based on assumptions or incorrect views of someone. And so obviously I think a lot of people were worried about your family, because those assumptions can lead to very, very bad outcomes or bad situations.
Yes,
And so I
and
just wanted you to
they have,
also.
Natalie, and I think people are probably aware of a lot of those. So we have had in the past some very serious situations. The first of which happened while Hal was still alive, and then after he died as well. I do think that when in 2014 Hal had an extortion threat, and he was very far along in his ALS and already had decided not to try to push for any more crazy cures. I think that threw him over the edge, and he decided he actually did let me know that he felt horrible that he could not communicate that he could not protect the family.
Yeah.
And it was a bad end to his life. It was a bad end to his life. I will always resent that.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it was
What
a
do you want
bad.
to what do you want to share with people? What do you want people to know?
I mean, if I were to get graphic, I think it's been shared before. It was just that we received some extortion threats, and this particular situation, the they were able to get our local enforcement to SWAT our house, and Hal, we had to take Hal out in the middle of a shower. And showers when you're on a tracheostomy are horrible because you're detached from your breathing temporarily and you're naked, and it's very vulnerable. And we had to bring him out of the house like that. And he was shivering and he couldn't talk, and we had to reattach him. It was awful. It was just a traumatic experience, followed by threats to turn off our power and threats to do all other kinds of things. Um, and It was scary. It was physically and emotionally traumatic for all of us.
It's horrible to even think about, Fran. No one should have to go through this. And like you said earlier, this Bitcoin was not about the money. It was about something much more important, about the way we humans interact with each other and about freedom. And so, on behalf of everyone in the Bitcoin community, I'm so sorry that your family had to go through that. And I hope that, watching something like this, seeing someone, this is why I really like this format of interviews and allowing people to share their own stories, because sometimes we judge and we do bad things because we don't really understand who that person is, and
Yeah.
we make assumptions and we judge books by their cover. And I hope that people have a new understanding of you and your family, because you're fighting hard after his death to keep his memory alive and also to help others who are battling this horrible disease. And one thing that I remember you saying in the spaces is that your family spent most of the Bitcoin that he mined, which was worth almost nothing at the time, on his treatments, right?
Yeah. So it was a lifesaver, though. So that's always going to be something good.
How do you want Hal to be remembered, especially for so many people who really do admire him and his work that he contributed? How do you want people to remember him?
I think as someone who, a futurist, someone who had so much confidence that the world was going to be a wondrous place, that things were going to always eventually. I don't think Hal believed in a smooth road necessarily, but he did believe that he had a lot of faith in mankind. He was a very optimistic person, and I think, and he was very humble. He didn't ever, he was never arrogant. I think to remember him as a humble person, an enthusiastic person, someone who had great faith in the future, someone who wanted to be around to see the future, and and if there was anything he could do to make this future more exciting and better and more fair and more accessible to other people, he was there.
Why was he so passionate about that? Why was he so passionate about the principles behind Bitcoin and providing a future that is more fair and maybe more accessible to people around the world that are connected by the internet?
I don't know the why. I just know the was. That was Hal, and he was an amazing person, and I was just so lucky to have wandered into him and ended up with him.
It's amazing to hear you speak about him, because it's so clear, or at least I get the impression that you're still so in love with him and no time has passed. And if he were to appear right now, it
Oh
would be, it
God.
would,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I still always think about what would he do here, and I wish he was here. And, yeah.
what's your favorite memory of him?
I don't have one favorite memory. I don't. I wish I could just
Right.
have his arms around me again, Natalie. I wish I could go to him when I don't know what to do. I wish we could have our talks. I wish we could run together. I wish he could convince me to do the things that I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of a lot of things. I'm not like Hal. I'm not an optimist. I'm a scared person, and he kept me from being that way. And sometimes when I don't want to do things, I try to think about, well, Hal would have wanted me to do this. So I don't have a favorite memory. It's a big thing. I wish he was here. I would love to be able to do some to help destroy this disease that destroyed him. The one
Everything you
thing,
said is so beautiful. It's so beautiful. I mean, I think that so many people, even though it wasn't a lifetime in terms of like the chance to grow old together, think of how many people want to have the kind of love that you guys had.
yeah, yeah, I know, no, I know that. I feel lucky. I wish he was here, but eventually everyone's life ends. He liked to be a pilot. He liked to do all kinds of crazy things, and I tell myself, well, he could have died doing one of those things. Could have gone sky jumping or skydiving or out in a private plane and gotten into a crash. Something like that could have happened.
So tell us about this challenge because this is the way to really honor him every single year. I know a lot of people are already getting involved. I've created a team, so if you want to join, there's a link in the show notes and we'd love to have you. You can participate from anywhere in the world, but I'll let Fran kind of take over and share what is the Running Bitcoin Challenge.
Okay, cool. I think this is the third year that we're doing it officially as a Running Bitcoin Challenge, and maybe only the second year that we have as much it put in place. It's from January 3rd to January 10th this year, and the reason why we're ending it on the 10th is just to commemorate that tweet 15 years ago, coming up on 2009, January 10th, when Hal tweeted running Bitcoin after that first transaction. And it kind of seemed like a neat idea. There were already people who called themselves the Bitcoin runners and all other people that knew that about the tweet, and it seemed kind of nice to combine the running, which towards the last part of Hal's life was actually one of his big hobbies. He had a lot of hobbies, but I would say that he had a lot of focus on running the Boston Marathon, and he was doing a lot of half marathons, and so running was a big thing, and he and I running together was a big thing. So combining the running with this tweet into our big challenge, we're going to be using the proceeds towards as it's completely towards research to find a cure for ALS, and which, as I said, there has been progress since Hal passed, and I'm hoping that we can make a big difference here. One thing that I was really gratified by the response and how people responded to the challenge last year and the year before, and I'm hoping this challenge will grow into a bigger and bigger movement. My big dream is that, and I think it's possible, is that our wonderful Bitcoin community can be the reason, can be responsible, shall I say, for finding a cure for ALS. If this gets big enough, if our Bitcoin community comes together and works towards this, it would be so cool if that was that was how the cure for ALS was finally discovered. I think it's a big enough group. We're passionate enough people, and I see it as a possibility.
Well, this community is certainly very passionate. I know people are signing up. So, just in terms of the logistics, you can literally be anywhere and participate. You donate. Like, how does it work?
Okay. Because you can find out all the details at runningbitcoin.us. And yes, you can be anywhere. We're looking for people to try to run a total of a half marathon over the 7 days. You can do it all at once, or you can do multiple half marathons if you want. So that's, or you can walk it. Or you can not do it at all and just donate. Where people can sign up as teams, and the teams can try to pool together the running, or they can see how many half marathons they can put together as a team. I'm going to be doing it. I've been doing it every year. It's kind of fun. I take the dogs out, and I'll try to stay on top of that. I'm so non-technical, but I'll try to do some video tweets while I'm out there because it's fun. And yes, it can be anywhere in the world. The site, again, runningbitcoin.us, has all the info on how to make the donations. Donations can be made in Bitcoin, or they can be made also, if people prefer, in, I believe, dollars, US dollars.
Perfect. Yeah, we look forward to it. And again, link in the show notes. I hope people join the Coin Stories team. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you about the future. You talked about how Hal was really hopeful and he was an optimist. What is your hope for the future? And this could be Bitcoin related, or it could be absolutely anything.
I would like, I right now, I love, I'm such a medical person, so I'm going to go back to advances in healthcare, advances in life, advances in curing ALS, big time again. I would love to see. I'll reiterate the advances partially due to Bitcoin community. I'm very enthusiastic and optimistic that Bitcoin will continue to be accepted, and that all of these roadblocks that we're meeting, all of the issues with people abusing it, all of those things will be surmounted, and it's going to be a really good thing for society.
Fran, there are people watching this who may have also lost a loved one, or maybe they're seeing them struggle right now. Do you have any just words of advice for them?
I sure do, Natalie. Focus on the good times. Remember the good times, and don't think about the bad times. Thinking about the bad times is just painful, and it doesn't accomplish anything. I learned that after Hal passed, and at first I was having a lot of difficulty with all of those horrible, horrific memories of the of him struggling, of watching him lose everything piece by piece by piece, and him trying so hard to keep going, to persevere on, to live no matter what. And it got harder and harder every time he would adapt. Things would his adaptations would no longer work, and we just kept trying and trying. And those are bad memories. And remembering those things and remembering the end just brings me pain. But what I do find is remembering the good times, remembering the many, many good times we had, makes me happy. And at first I was having nightmares after he passed. And then I got rid of all the pictures of Hal sick, and I posted pictures of Hal healthy up around the walls, and I took away my screensaver things that had Hal sick, and I put only happy things. And it worked, because now when I think of Hal, I think of the good times, and I have happy dreams, and I smile and I laugh and I chuckle because there were so many good times.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I wish I could reach across and give you a big hug. Again, we're so, so grateful for everything that your family stands for. And I hope to get to see you in person soon.
Sounds good, Natalie. Thank you.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode of the Coin Stories podcast, brought to you by Bitdeer. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any new content. This show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing should constitute as official investment advice, and you should always do your own research. My inbox is open if you want to share feedback or guest suggestions. You can reach me at Natalie@talkingbitcoin.com. I'll see you next time.